New Year's Eve had promised a warm, intimate family gathering. However, upon entering her daughter's apartment, Mother was met with a disconcerting scene. Only her son-in-law and his relatives were present at the festive table. Her beloved daughter and grandchildren were nowhere to be seen. "Where are my daughter and grandchildren?" she inquired, bewildered. "I sent them all away. My mother cannot stand them," the husband declared with a smug air. Greetings, dear listeners. I'm delighted to welcome you to my channel. I have an intriguing new story to share. Enjoy. Irina Lvovna had always considered herself a cultured individual. A teacher with 30 years of experience, she possessed remarkable composure, even when tempted to hurl a grade book at an insolent ninth grader. Following her retirement, she finally had ample time to devote to her daughter and grandchildren. Polina was 30 years old. Her children, 6-year-old Timothy and 3-year-old Liza, were the absolute center of Irina Lvovna's universe, particularly after the loss of her husband 3 years prior. Her relationship with her son-in-law, Edward, was stable. He was a manager at a construction firm, earning approximately $120,000, which was a respectable sum in their provincial city. Polina also worked as an accountant at the same company, contributing $65,000 to the family income. They had purchased a 3-room apartment in a new building on the outskirts and were renovating it themselves. Irina Lvovna frequently visited to assist, whether it was cooking borscht or looking after the children while her daughter and son-in-law were busy with tiling or wallpapering. The issues began 2 years ago, when Polina's mother-in-law, Lyudmila Fyodorovna, was widowed and began to aggressively insert herself into the young couple's lives. Previously, she had lived in a neighboring district with her husband, a former military officer, and had caused little trouble. Now, alone in her one-room Khrushchev-era apartment, she seemed to have been unleashed. She called Edward 10 times a day, demanding attention, money, and assistance. Irina Lvovna learned of this piecemeal through Polina's tearful phone calls. Initially, Lyudmila Fyodorovna simply visited on weekends without invitation. Then, she started criticizing Polina's cooking, housekeeping, and child-rearing methods. Edward remained silent, feigning ignorance. If Polina dared to object, he would hiss, "Don't you dare be rude to my mother. She's experienced a great loss. She needs support." "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore," Polina confided during one of Irina Lvovna's visits. They sat in the kitchen while the children watched cartoons in the living room. "She showed up yesterday at 8 in the evening, just as I'd put Lisa to bed. She started wailing about how no one loves her, how her son has forgotten her. Edith rushed to comfort her and woke up our daughter. Lisa then couldn't sleep until midnight and was fussy all day today." "Have a serious talk with Edith," Irina Lvovna advised. "Explain that this is unacceptable, that you have your own family, your own boundaries." "I've tried. He thinks I'm heartless. His mother is alone, and I'm selfish." Irina Lvovna remained silent, but a fire raged within her. She saw how exhausted her daughter was. Work, children, household chores, and now this mother-in-law with her endless demands. Polina had lost weight. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes, and she had become nervous and irritable. The situation worsened in the spring. Lyudmila Fyodorovna declared she could no longer live alone in her apartment. The memories were too painful. She hinted that it would be beneficial to move in with her children, as they had 3 rooms. There would be enough space for everyone. Edward was enthusiastic about the idea, but Polina flatly refused, sparking a major argument. "My mother is more important than your whims," Edward roared. "If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have married you at all. She said from the beginning that you weren't good enough for me." Polina then gathered the children and went to stay with her mother for 3 days. Edward called, apologized, and swore it wouldn't happen again. Irina Lvovna persuaded her daughter to return, though an inner voice screamed to flee from this mama's boy as far as possible. But where could she go? With 2 children, Polina's salary barely covered their expenses. Renting an apartment was beyond their means. Lyudmila Fyodorovna, realizing her move-in plan had failed, changed tactics. She began visiting on weekdays while Polina was at work, taking over the apartment. She rearranged furniture, discarded items she deemed unnecessary, and prepared meals according to her own recipes. Polina would return home and not recognize her own kitchen. The children's toys were packed away in boxes to keep them out of the way. Polina's favorite mug had disappeared into the trash bin, dismissed as an old chipped item merely taking up space. "Mom, I'm going crazy," Polina whispered into the phone. I come home and feel like a guest. Edict says his mother is trying to help, and I'm ungrateful. Let her help in her own apartment, Irina Lvovna responded sharply. Polina, you need to draw a line. This is your home. But Polina was afraid of losing her family, afraid she couldn't manage alone, afraid of traumatizing the children. She tried to endure, but with each passing day, she felt something inside her breaking. An incident occurred with Timofey in the summer. The boy returned from kindergarten upset, recounting how Grandma Liuda had confiscated his tablet, telling him he played on it too much. The tablet was a gift from Irina Lvovna for his 6th birthday. Polina herself had installed educational programs and monitored his screen time. But Lyudmila Fyodorovna had her own ideas. When Polina asked for the tablet back, her mother-in-law threw a tantrum, claiming she wasn't respected, that she meant well, but was being insulted. Have you completely lost your mind? Edward yelled at his wife. Mother is right. The child is ruining his eyes. You don't know how to raise children at all. Polina couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her bag, took the children, and went to her mother's. She stayed for a week. Edward apologized again. The tablet was returned, but the bitterness remained. Irina Lvovna saw how her daughter was changing. Polina became quiet, withdrawn, as if something inside her had extinguished, and Lyudmila Fyodorovna grew bolder with each visit. She no longer asked, but demanded money for medicine, for repairs, for a new fur coat. Edward dutifully paid, even when they were struggling financially. Polina attempted to protest, only to be accused of being cold-hearted. A major scandal erupted in the fall. Lyudmila Fyodorovna declared that she wanted to celebrate New Year's Eve at the young couple's apartment, as hers was too small and inconvenient. Edward immediately agreed. Polina objected. They had planned to celebrate with just the children and then visit Irina Lvovna. But Edward was adamant. We will celebrate with my family, he stated. If your mother wants to see you, she can come to us, but the main table will be for my mother. Polina tried to argue, but Edward started shouting, accusing her of turning the children against Grandma Liuda and driving a wedge between him and his mother. Polina burst into tears and locked herself in the bathroom. Irina Lvovna, upon hearing this on the phone, could barely restrain herself from coming over and giving the spoiled son a piece of her mind, but her daughter asked her not to interfere. Mom, I'll handle it myself, Polina said wearily. Just come over on the 31st in the evening. I'll bring the children's gifts. We'll see each other at least a little. Irina Lvovna agreed, though her heart ached with anxiety. On December 31st, she traveled across the city with a large box of presents. For Timofey, a Lego set he had long desired. For Lisa, an interactive doll. There were also sweets, fruits, a bottle of fine wine for her son-in-law, and perfume for her daughter. Irina Lvovna had spent nearly her entire pension but didn't regret it. The most important thing was for her grandchildren to be happy. She arrived at the apartment building around 9 in the evening. Polina's 5th-floor apartment windows were illuminated, and silhouettes were visible through the sheer curtains. Irina Lvovna took the elevator, rang the doorbell. Edward opened the door, dressed in a festive shirt, slightly tipsy. His face was smug, his cheeks flushed. From inside the apartment came the sounds of voices, laughter, and clinking glasses. Ah, Irina Lvovna, he drawled, slurring his words. Come in, come in. She stepped across the threshold, removed her coat. The hallway smelled of mandarins and herring under a fur coat. Irina Lvovna walked into the living room, box in hand, and froze. About 8 people were seated at the table. Lyudmila Fyodorovna was at the head, with Edward beside her. Next were his cousins and their wives, some aunt in a raspberry sweater. Everyone was eating, drinking, laughing. The television blared at full volume. The table groaned under the weight of salads, cold cuts, and hot dishes. But Polina was absent, as were Timofey and Lisa. Where are my daughter and grandchildren? Irina Lvovna cried out. Lyudmila Fyodorovna turned to her, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and smiled a venomous smile. Edward leaned back in his chair, squinting with satisfaction. I sent them all away, he announced loudly with pride. My mother cannot stand them. Lyudmila Fyodorovna nodded like a bobblehead. Finally, the house is in order. she said sweetly, without all that whining and fuss. Thank my son for coming to his senses. The cousins snickered. The aunt and Raspberry giggled. Someone clinked glasses. Irina Lvovna stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the box of gifts, and stared at the gathering. Something inside her broke. For 30 years, she had taught children kindness, justice, and respect. For 30 years, she had kept her composure, swallowed insults, and resolved conflicts with words. But now before her sat not people, but boorish animals who had thrown her daughter and young grandchildren out into the freezing cold on New Year's Eve. She slowly placed the box on the floor. She took off her shoes, low-heeled, comfortable, with stable soles. Irina Lvovna, what are you doing? Edward began, but she wasn't listening. Lyudmila Fyodorovna sat with her back partly turned, still smiling smugly. Irina Lvovna approached, grabbed her by the shoulder, and sharply spun her around. The mother-in-law gasped in surprise. How dare you? She started but didn't finish. Irina Lvovna swung her arm and slapped her across the face so hard that she tumbled off her chair onto the floor. The aunt and Raspberry shrieked. The cousins jumped up. Edward roared, "Are you completely insane?" He tried to stand, but Irina Lvovna was faster. She turned and struck him across the face with the back of her hand. The blow was so powerful that Edward recoiled, tripped over a chair leg, and fell backward, pulling the tablecloth with him. Salads, cold cuts, glasses flew to the floor. Herring under a fur coat smeared across the carpet. Lyudmila Fyodorovna tried to get up, clinging to the edge of the table, but Irina Lvovna grabbed her by the collar of her blouse and dragged her towards the door. The mother-in-law kicked her legs, screamed, scratched, but Irina Lvovna was taller and much stronger. "Let go, I'll call the police!" Lyudmila Fyodorovna shrieked. "Get out, you creature!" Irina Lvovna roared and kicked her out into the hallway. She crashed into the wall, slid to the floor, and howled. Edward, by this time, had recovered, jumped up, and lunged at Irina Lvovna. She met him with a punch to the solar plexus, not strong, but enough to make him double over. Then she grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and dragged him after his mother. "How dare you throw out my daughter and grandchildren?" she hissed, dragging him down the corridor. "You damned mama's boy, you spineless wretch." The cousins tried to intervene, but Irina Lvovna glanced at them with such a look that they froze. There was so much fury in her eyes that even the drunken men were intimidated. She dragged Edward to the threshold, where the sobbing Lyudmila Fyodorovna was already sitting, and shoved him. He tumbled head over heels, knocking his mother over. Both fell onto the landing in a tangle of limbs. "And don't let me see hide nor hair of you here again." Irina Lvovna roared and slammed the door. Silence descended upon the apartment. The guests sat at the ruined table, stunned. The aunt and Raspberry trembled, her hand pressed to her mouth. One of the cousins mumbled, "Perhaps we should leave?" "Get out," Irina Lvovna commanded curtly. 2 minutes later, the apartment was empty. They fled, pulling on their jackets as they went, not looking back. Irina Lvovna leaned her back against the door, breathing heavily. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded. She couldn't believe what she had just done. And she, an educated person, a teacher, had laid hands on people. But there was not a trace of regret, only a feeling of wild satisfaction. She picked up the box of gifts, walked into the bedroom, took out her phone, and called her daughter. "Polina, where are you, Mom?" Her daughter's voice was hoarse and tearful. "We're sitting in a cafe at the train station. Edith kicked us out after lunch, told us to leave before the guests arrived. Liza is crying. She wants to go home. I don't know what to do." "Come home immediately," Irina Lvovna said firmly. "I'm waiting for you. Edith won't be here, and he won't be returning. Come, I'll explain." 40 minutes later, Polina and the children entered the apartment. Liza was sobbing. Timofey was sullen and red-faced from tears. Polina looked like a squeezed lemon in an old down jacket, her cheeks red from the cold, her eyes exhausted. She stopped at the threshold, looking around the ransacked living room. Overturned chairs, food stains on the carpet, shattered glass fragments scattered about. "Mom, what happened here?" "What should have happened a long time ago," Irina Lvovna replied. "Go, wash up, change, we'll celebrate New Year's." All right. They tidied the apartment, prepared new salads from what remained in the refrigerator. Irina Lvovna brought out the gifts for the children. Timofey and Liza brightened, laughed, and began assembling the Lego. At 11 o'clock, they sat down at the table, just the four of them. Polina tried to get details, but Irina Lvovna waved her off. Later for now. Just be happy that you're together. Edouard called around 1 in the morning. His voice was drunk and angry. Are you completely out of your mind? Mother's in the hospital. She has a concussion. I'm suing you. You'll go to jail for this. Irina Lvovna took the phone from her daughter and calmly replied, Sue me, but I'll sue you too, for kicking your wife and young children out into the freezing cold on New Year's Eve. Child Protective Services will be very interested, and I'll also tell them how your mother tormented Polina for 2 years. There will be plenty of witnesses. This is my apartment, Edouard bellowed. Co-owned, Polina corrected coldly. The owner is equal. If you set foot here, I'll call the police for trespassing, so think about it. She hung up. Polina looked at her mother in amazement. Mom, it's over, daughter. It's all done. Tomorrow we'll go to a lawyer. You'll file for divorce. Move in with me until you sort out the apartment. You deserve a normal life. Polina started crying, but these were different tears now. Relief, liberation. 2 years later, Polina sat in the kitchen of her new 2-room apartment and looked out the window. Snowflakes swirled outside. From the other room came the children's laughter. Timofey was telling his sister something. Liza was giggling. Soon her mother would arrive from the next building, bringing an apple pie as promised. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The apartment was sold. The money was enough for the down payment on this 2-room apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Lyudmila Fyodorovna attempted to sue for assault, but the case was dismissed. Witnesses to that New Year's Eve never materialized. All the guests suddenly saw and remembered nothing. However, Polina found neighbors who testified about how her mother-in-law had tormented her, how Edouard had yelled at night, and how the children had been kicked out onto the stairs. Polina changed jobs, landing a position at a large company. Her salary nearly doubled. The children started at a new school and kindergarten, making friends. Irina Lvovna sold her 1-room apartment and moved into the neighboring building to be close, but not to interfere. Polina encountered Edouard once in a shopping center. He looked older, gaunt. He looked past her as if he didn't recognize her. Rumor had it he married a quiet girl whom Lyudmila Fyodorovna treated like a servant, and for them, everything had worked out. The doorbell rang. Polina opened it. Irina Lvovna stood on the threshold with a pie, dusted with snow. The grandchildren are home, of course. Come in, Mom. They went into the kitchen. Timothy and Liza burst in behind them, clinging to their grandmother. Irina Lvovna smiled, placed the pie on the table, and brushed the snow from her hair. Well, she said, taking a thermos from her bag. Shall we drink tea or stand around? Polina laughed, reaching for the cups. The children were already reaching for the pie. Outside, dusk was gathering, but the kitchen was warm and bright. Everything was finally good.